want to overburden their citizens with taxes to be able to create the most beautiful experience yet in the Olympics. So that leads to all the economic meltdown they talk about. The last thing that we get from you guys is that the bidding process is sometimes fraught with funny things. When you continue to rotate it, you create inferiority complex amongst those who never win the bids, and it creates terrible framings around them as to why they never win the bid and all of that. And because they are so angry that they never won the bids, they will pull out. That is the bit of pull out we get, the bit of buyout that we get from your world. What are engagements to all of that? And I'll tell you what these guys do say. So opening opposition says that your own case says a lot of these countries who will most likely host and come around the host table are people that can actually host. They are doing well. That immediately means that the significant challenge you want to solve of the economic burden it places on these countries really is non-existent. Especially when your case says that these countries are great guys, they are doing well. In DPM speech, they are doing well. They are the best things in the world. They can host. They always have money. Then economic burden cannot be the problem why you want to shift, you want to make the Olympics one thing or at one place. The next thing that they say is that, well, we are not into this process of bidding to satisfy people's egos and make people feel very good of themselves. If you are not up to the bill, if you are rejected, if your bid is rejected, it's unclear why we should care too much about you, one single country, when the Olympics will still happen. They think that, to a very large extent, your complaints around inferiority and all things around harms largely will not exist because of what you paint those countries to look like. What do we get from opening opposition? Opening opposition's biggest conversations are around how people are able to use sports, hosts, to frame certain identities or dispel certain identities about themselves. Then finally, how they are able, there's cultural trade and all of those things that exist. We think that to a very significant extent, they are limited to the extent, they are limited in analysis as to why in hosting an Olympics, the most important thing we should care about is how we frame you, that country. I don't think panel felt it was not so important, why it is too important for us to care about how we think about you as a country. We are coming to have a tournament, we are coming to have an Olympics for the whole world. It's unclear why the most significant thing that you achieve in your world is certain temporal, political whitewashing. I've already told you why. Even on all the arguments, the engagements they give to your cases, based on your own context of which countries will most likely want to be hosting these, is most likely countries who will not have economic burden as a problem. But the most significant thing that you get from them is that you have a long span to be able to prepare for these games. It looks like you can always prepare towards them. So in instances where you have inherent economic challenges, you're able to recalibrate your economies and you get to that point. What happened in the closing half is quite different. So closing government says that the most important reason why they probably want to limit or want to create one host in these games is for a couple of reasons. Things around difficulties for countries to access certain countries' visas, climate issues, etc., conversations around how it gets too terrible. But then secondly, how there is a boom and bust economic happening. You host it, it looks like you are doing too well. After a month, at the end of the tournament, you are back to your empty hotels, you are back to your empty stadia, you are back to your empty all of those things. If the frame is that those who host are mostly people who are rich, it's unclear, it's not proven how much that one of the maintenance of this stadia become a significant economic burden to them. But even so, the next thing that we talk about is that you need countries in which you could predict things. What could you most likely predict? Things like countries where it's easy to access visas, etc. We felt those kinds of benefits or those kinds of harms are so framed to the extent that they do not affect just everybody. It looks like a lot of simple things could be done to make those better. So if we just fix embassy issues, then visa issues doesn't become an issue. Then closing opposition says, if you say climate change conversations and how it toxifies the environment when you host everywhere, then there are already conversations around climate and how individual host nations are able to like impute a lot of innovation into the individual hosting. So there were a lot of innovations. Every different host wants to do different innovations, wanted to change a lot of things. We had a lot of those conversations around how those significant challenges that you claim could simply be solved. What we get from closing opposition is a couple of things. They say if you care about sustaining the Olympics, then it must be anchored on the core principle that holds it up. The principle around how it's able to create so much interconnectedness and how it rapidly like excites people. That like whole atmosphere that it creates at once for one country is something that they want. Very like the biggest conversation on the closing was on will the excitement exist or not. The biggest POI you get in this debate is the POI about the English Premier League and how people will still watch the Olympics. Panel felt people will actually still watch the Olympics, but that is not where the boom and bust occur. People will still go there. Ghana will send 20 athletes. There is new sports that one Ghanaian might participate in. The boom and bust that is the anchor of your case is not supported by that. The boom and bust comes from audience. The audience who wants new experiences. The audience who wants all of these. The reason why 7 times US hosting it does not work is that they say it is hosted in different generations where there are different expectations. There are different conversations. It is unclear how there are a lot of different conversations, thereby piquing excitement of your audience. So the biggest people that most of you care about, because for your impact to make sense, you have to rely on audience. You have to rely on tourists. You will not only have to rely on technical team, minority games. You will not have to rely on that, because with those alone, your scope of widening the debate and how it terribly affects them, because they waste a lot of hotel infrastructure that becomes redundant, will not work. For your world to work, you need a lot of audience. For you to get a lot of audience, there must be something of a promise of something extra that they've not seen before. We also felt it is not a very accurate comparison to even start EPL at like to stagger the two together. EPL versus the Olympics. They stand obviously for different things. There is already understanding about what the various represent. Those various, like the various things that you talk about, commodities, represent different things. Probably you want to compare the Olympics to something like the World Cup, not like all of that. But then you're unable to show that something like World Cup, which is more synonymous and will be actually a more fairer example or comparative, exists to be hosted in one place. We think that all of those things do not exist. For you to get all the harms that exist in your world, you must, for there to be an overwhelming amount of people accessing the countries and visa issues becoming issues, because if it's just 30 representatives from these developing countries seeking visas to these great countries, it's not so much of a problem. It's most likely the influx that will cause all of these burdens. So for everything we get from closing government, for it to be at that scale that they want it to be, for there to be so much predictability, maybe they want more people to be there. For there to be for there to be a lot of engagement, for there to be that boom and bust, all of those things rely on the number of people you are going to pull there. They say they are the only team that are able to pull more people because they're able to entrench the anchor which has always made the Olympics remain what it is. You don't touch its sustainability because you continue to give that enriching experience. And more importantly, the entire government bench is unable to prove A, how all those petty harms have reached a tipping point where there need to be like a complete overhaul of that system. If the challenges are visa, climate, all of those things inherently could be solved, are being solved, and they show examples of how all of those things exist. I think with that it's quite obvious. But on the diagonal, I think the biggest issue with opening government was that they reject completely the idea that these countries are suffering to host because they don't have money. Everybody in the room really feels like the conversations is more way beyond that because of your own context of how these countries necessarily can actually host and they can host. That immediately means that why not let those, how many countries can host? I think more than 10 countries in the world can host every time, right? Why don't you let it rotate amongst those who can host every time? Because of the so-called rich experience every 4 years. Why is it bad? So just on that frame alone, you still get them beating you because if you want people to attend your tournament, if you want people to attend the Olympics, countries have not complained in the first place. So really, there was very little to even compare on that diagonal. For these guys, for OO and CG, the comparison was around why culture is relevant and how it engages what really harms the Olympics. Again, very limited conversations around what will harm the Olympics because CG says that all of these interactions will continue to exist somewhat. It's unclear how immediately all those interactions will go away. But then secondly, if you want to use sports as a way of whitewashing, it is temporal, it's not sustainable, you are back as the shitty person, we still think about you the same way, we've not changed our mindset about how we see the Saudi Arabian countries, like we don't get all of those things. I'll pause here and take questions. It looks like you have a question. I thought you had a question. You said? Yeah. Only question. Yeah, personal feedback. Papa, no question. Okay.